Now we'll move on to CalRecycle and the position on the product financed and managed recovery. Mr. Leary, I would ask, since we're about an hour behind or 40 minutes, if you could reduce your comments to about 5 minutes.
I'd be happy to, Chair. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, Chair Chesbro. My name is Mark Leary. I'm the Acting Director of CalRecycle. Prior to my involvement in the passage of 63, I was the Executive Director at the Integrated Waste Management Board that Member Chesbro referred to earlier. And as a result, I've been involved, as the organization has, in studying extended producer responsibility for a long period of time. I need to introduce a disclaimer, though. I'm here today to speak and give some background on our organization's analysis of extended producer responsibility. I'm not ready at this point to represent the administration's perspective on that, since the administration, as you all know, is otherwise occupied, and we really haven't had a chance to engage much with the new administration. However, that said, you wouldn't probably be surprised to hear that Secretary Laird has spoken on this subject a number of times since his appointment as Secretary, and as recently as this morning spoke of the effectiveness and some may perceive as advocacy for moving to this kind of framework and this kind of proposal. That said, I'm not sure I can enhance introductory comments offered by Member Chesbro about the board and now CalRecycle's history with the program. And I think the board was very much aware of California's success in recycling, but looking for opportunities to improve on that success. We are at 62% a recycling rate of the waste generated in California at this point in time. That is largely in part due to the success of the recycling infrastructure that's been built in California, but also in part a reflection of the economy and the fact that disposal numbers are down because primarily the housing industry is down. But the board wanted to go above and beyond at that time, above and beyond the great success California had in recycling, and looked for new models. And I think it's probably helpful to set some context about California's current program as when it comes to solid waste and recycling. CalRecycle is an organization at this time of about 700 positions. It oversees since the passage of the beverage container recycling program in 1986, there have been probably 22 separate programs, separate and apart from the fundamental Integrated Waste Management Act that requires cities and counties to divert its solid waste and set the goal for 50% for the year 2000. 22 separate programs ranging from the $1.2 billion beverage container recycling program to the $100 million electronic waste recycling program to the $40 to $50 million tire recycling program to the $20 to $30 million used oil recycling program, and any number of smaller programs that CalRecycle and its predecessor organization were looked to oversee without any necessary additional fees or resources. Things like making sure the newsprint in California is has a recycled content, and rigid plastic packaging containers. Those were all absorbed within the fundamental fees provided by the Integrated Waste Management Act. So California has a very expansive program. Lots of resources devoted to the collection of those fees and then turning those fees around and providing redemption values or recycling incentives back out into the economic mainstream or back into the marketplace. But the fundamental nature of that program is government as a middle person or as a middleman, ensuring that the fees are collected adequately, and that implies all kinds of fraud prevention practices, insurance that the right people are paying the right amounts. It doesn't include, my representation of 700 people at CalRecycle doesn't include the fact that we're probably supporting 125 people at the Board of Equalization for the collection of the Integrated Waste Management Act fee, the tire fee, and the e-waste fee. So there's tremendous resources funneled through government-run programs. And so when the board looked at that, back in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, and started to talk about it. They looked for ways to improve on California's overall recycling effort, yet not being additionally labor intensive or looking to build new and more expansive government programs to do that. And when we looked to British Columbia and the story you heard from Mr. Hasty, they found a model that made sense. And ultimately, as Member Chesbro suggested, adopted a framework as a policy perspective that was later introduced into legislation. It has yet to pass, but that was the board's objective at the time, to move forward in this extended producer responsibility as an expansion on California's success in recycling. I think, as I think some of the questions asked initially, you wanted to hear a little bit about paint and carpet. Let me give you a little background. I'm joined here by Kathy Freevert, who's our project manager for both of those programs going forward. But the carpet stewardship was an effort to address the fact that carpet comprises approximately 3.2% of the solid waste stream, about 1.2 million tons in California, and a top 10 item in terms of waste materials being disposed in California. Paint stewardship. Paint represents about a third of all the household hazardous waste collected through local household hazardous waste programs and cost local government millions of dollars to manage, as you've heard already. 2398 and 1343 were the first product stewardship laws in California. They changed the way recycling is financed. Manufacturers, through stewardship organizations, cover the end-of-life management costs. These were landmark pieces of legislation for California. But there were several things that didn't fit quite with what the board framework policy perspective suggested would be ideal. 1343 relies on a stewardship organization to set the goals. The board adopted the framework that suggests that maybe government ought to set the goals and the stewardship organization react to that. 1343 failed to specify expectations for overall recycling targets. The 2398 allows some goals at a minimum to equal the goals established in the 2012 Carpet Recycling Stewardship Organization's MOU. 1343 and 2398 have really no fundamental ability for CalRecycle to disapprove a plan if it doesn't quite advance the goals sufficiently. And then there's no provision in either to assess penalties on stewardship organizations to fail to meet those goals. I'm not suggesting these are horrible things, but all I'm offering is, in terms of perspective, how they differed from the model that the board adopted as the fundamental framework for product stewardship and emulating the British Columbia program. Maybe Kathy could just very briefly touch on what we got going in response to those pieces of legislation currently and where we hope to be soon.
Okay. Yeah. Some of the things that we're working on right now is that in response to the legislation, we do have a listserv that's up and running, and I encourage anyone who's interested in following the implementation to sign on. We have our website up also, and a main activity we have going on right now is developing regulations that will add some clarity and explain some of the administrative aspects of the law. And along those lines, we've had workshops. We had a workshop on February 22nd and one coming up this week that deal with informal draft regulatory text. The regulatory text covers things like definitions, explains how payments can be made to CalRecycle to cover its services. It adds clarity to the criteria for plan approval and reports, and touches on it explains a progressive enforcement approach. And these are things that will make it easier to implement and help us implement the program overall. And a few other things. The first plans are due, we'll receive the one for carpet September 2011, and it's to be approved by April 2012. And for paint, the plans will come in April 2012 and must be approved by July 2012. We're on schedule to meet those goals and deadlines. As far as the regulatory process, we will be wrapping that up in December this year, possibly going in a little bit to next year. So those are the main activities we're involved with right now.
Let me close, if I could, Chair, by asked for facts and figures, and Kathy and her team are watching extended producer responsibility roll out across the world, really. And a quick comparison I think is illustrative is the packaging efforts of Ontario and Belgium. Ontario is a government design program. It's managed and implementing packaging stewardship programs, whereas Belgium is a private sector extended producer responsibility model. The government-run program in Ontario has achieved about a 50% recovery rate at a cost of about $150 per ton, or $11 per capita. In contrast, the Belgium Extended Producer Responsibility Program has achieved a 97% recovery at a cost of $102 a ton, or about $7 per capita. The cost reductions and efficiencies realized in the EPR program were likely only possible due because of the participation of the producers. And finally, the EPR program in Belgium created about 2,600 jobs, according to the sources we've been interacting with. So we offer that as a close, and happy to entertain any questions.
Assemblymember Grove.
Of our staff are devoted to ensuring public health and protection of the environment. It occurs in the management of solid waste, tires, used oil, and in some extent electronic waste.
And also the regulation of landfills and all solid waste facilities. So,
that's what. Well, did I not say solid? I didn't.
Well, you said no. Well, you said
the solid waste,
public safety. And,
yeah.
Right.
So that accounts for some 300 or so of our staff that work on those fundamental environmental protective programs. That said, I'm not sure. I mean, it would ultimately be defined by the role the organization was asked to play in overseeing those stewardship programs. We have some responsibility, as envisioned by the two bills passed last year, to ensure that these programs are implemented effectively. Hence, staff are writing regulation, interacting with the stewardship organizations, the participants, to make sure that the regulations are as comprehensive as they need to be to make sure the program goes forward. It certainly would, across the world, extended producer responsibilities has resulted in a diminishment of government involvement. It's a fundamental nature of the program. So there's no question that we would reduce dramatically as a result of having all these programs and their ancillary activities of collecting money and ensuring that money is collected and ensures there's no fraud would be reduced dramatically.
Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Leary, I'm curious your thoughts on the green chemistry initiative that gave DTSC authority, take-back authority, and end-of-life disposal authority. What are your thoughts on that? Are you in discussions with DTS? Should we have DTSC here as part of these discussions? And what's the role of the two groups in dealing with that?
I'm not sure my perspective is particularly important. I guess I can tell you that we work very closely with DTSC in any number of programs. We used to be sister agencies within the California Environmental Protection Agency. We're not involved. We're not part of that agency any longer, yet we work very closely. We share responsibilities in e-waste and the used oil management program. Staff are interacting to a great degree. Green chemistry always seemed to me to be very complementary to the whole idea of extended producer responsibility. You could argue whether one is a subset of the other or a sub-program of the other, but I think they're fundamentally related and they're very complementary. To the extent that materials or products are manufactured in a way that has enhances recyclability, in some respects, in my mind, incurs or infers that they don't have they have a lesser degree of hazardous materials as components. I would suggest that a product with lesser pollution generating materials would also be more recyclable and more enhanced by a stewardship organization and extended producer responsibility kind of process. So what green chemistry proposed to do initially was a very expansive look at products and the materials from which they're made. I think that's a very collaborative like activity in reviewing these products and how they might be recycled. But I don't go much deeper than that in knowledge about green chemistry at this moment.
I don't know if there are answers right now. I think it might be an open topic for future discussion on how we move forward, how the two agencies work together, and how it's all defined, and what their roles will be. So, just kind of an open item for the future, I think.
I think it's a good item as the new administration sort of sorts out their placement of people in different departments. We have that little budget deal going on. We have to taking up our time. Well, thank you, Mr. Leary and staff. That was insightful.